Today's topic is Federated Architecture. And so I think we discussed the NDHP report in one of the previous session. Now this is a continuation of the same because NDHP report has devoted a separate chapter on Federated Architecture, which is chapter 2. And kind of whatever we are doing under NDHP is somewhere converging to achieve the Federated Architecture across the country. So we should all be very clear about what Federated Architecture is, what are the different building blocks to achieve the Federated Architecture, and kind of we totally align with what the NDHP thinks about Federated Architecture. And please feel free to ask questions and make it more interactive session rather than I keep talking. So yeah, so before we start Federated Architecture, can some of you describe what is Federated Architecture in your own simple English? Raghav, Aditi, Akriti.
Hello.
Raghav, can you hear me?
So can you hear me? Hello.
I can hear you.
Okay, sir. Hello. Yeah. Sir, I think Federated Architecture is basically an enterprise architecture which is concerned with interoperability and data exchange and security minimum standards that are given that you need to follow.
See, you have given a very technical definition, Raghav. You're right, but I want a very simple definition. What Federated Architecture is, so that even common layman can understand what is Federated Architecture.
Sir, it is a set of building blocks that you need to follow.
Yeah, it is set of building blocks. It's an architecture basically. So Federated Architecture itself is an enterprise architecture. What is the definition of federated word here? Okay. So basically, one thing is there that Federated Architecture talks about three things. One is it talks about that one is Federated Architecture is a type of enterprise architecture. It's an enterprise architecture pattern. There are a lot of other enterprise architecture patterns. It is one of the enterprise architecture pattern. Number two, it is related to interoperability and information sharing between the different entities. Okay, but this can happen. So up to these 2 points, this happens to any architecture that is related to interoperability. Even a centralized architecture will also be a type of enterprise architecture. Centralized architecture will also talk about information sharing and interoperability. But the distinction between federated architecture and rest of the interoperability architectures is that data control remains with the entities who are owning the data, and there is a autonomous way of kind of exchanging the data even while data is maintained and managed by the individual entities. They can share that data on demand and with a proper authorization mechanism. So kind of who is owning the data in the federated architecture? The simple answer is data is owned by all the entities who are producing the data. Number one. Number two, so basically it's kind of a decentralized model that instead of a central repository where the complete data is residing, the US started with the health information exchange model, which was centralized in nature, and that was one of the failure point also. They thought that all the data should be pushed to a central registry, a central repository, and then rest of the other entities should use that data. But then the centralized repository can become a single point of failure. If it is a single database, there is a huge risk involved with that. So the simplest thing is your data should be remaining with the organizations who are producing the data, like all the provider organizations or labs or diagnostics or whoever is generating the data. But the sharing and interoperability of that data should happen so that other entities can use that data for caring for delivering the care of the patient. But that data sharing should happen only on request and with the proper consent of the patient, with the proper authorization received from the patient. So patient is the owner of that. And one more thing I want to mention here is that in the federated architecture, so federated architecture is also a little bit different from decentralized architecture. So in federated architecture and decentralized architecture, one basic difference is there can be multiple levels of exchanges of data basically. So it is not kind of one single exchange that is uniting all the data sources together. It can be an exchange of exchange. It can be kind of like an internet, for example. If you see internet, your machine is connected to this whole internet. This is a web of web basically. Through port 80, your laptop is connected to the internet. Then all other laptops, all the other computer machines also connected to the same internet through their own kind of networks. And whenever a request is generated for a particular web resource, it first looks into your domain, and then domain to domain, your request is routed till it finds a proper server where that request has to be serviced. So basically another example is telecom, and we have given this example many times. So when you make the call to your friend in Tamil Nadu or Bangalore, basically your call first is routed to your exchange. Then if that friend's number is not found in the registry of that exchange, then it is routed across to all other exchanges. So it's kind of a broadcasting. And then ultimately the exchange which find the mobile number of your friend, this is routed to that exchange. So basically all these different exchanges are connected together in a mesh, in a service mesh. So basically federated architecture is the same thing. Here, instead of one instance of exchange, there can be multiple exchanges which are connected together. Your data will be residing with the individual organizations who are generating it. We call it system of records. There will be a way of interoperability and information sharing so that the data can be exchanged between the entities, and the data exchange will happen with the proper authorization received from the patient. So these are several principles related to federated architecture. Any questions till now? I mean, any confusion, anything you want to discuss? Anyone?
Christian, sorry, one quick question. When you say, I didn't understand the difference between decentralized architecture and federated architecture. What is the difference?
Decentralized and federated, you're asking, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the only difference is centralized and decentralized both. Decentralized and federated both are common in terms of data is residing with the individual organizations who are generating it. The only difference is in decentralized architecture, there is kind of a single exchange model. There is no federation across the exchanges. It's kind of a one exchange which kind of connecting all the data sources. But in federated architecture, there is a federation among different exchanges, as I gave the telecom example. So because given the size of the country like India, we cannot assume that one exchange will be kind of tying up all the organizations together. Your data will be residing with the respective hospitals, be it in the public or private. You cannot expect that one single exchange will be enough to integrate all these different provider organizations, payer organizations, everything together. You need multiple exchanges, and you need sort of a federation among the exchanges. So only a sort of model like telecom exchange can work in a country of size of India. So the basic difference between decentralized and federated is, in federated architecture, there is a federation among multiple exchanges. In decentralized architecture, there is one single instance of exchange where all the data is kind of owned by the respective provider organizations at that. Anita?
Anji, that helps. Thank you.
So basically, the federated architecture, two objectives they want to achieve very clearly in NDHB. One is they want to ensure that patient should be owner of the data, which is kind of a big shift in thought process. Right now, the data is generated in hospitals. It resides in the hospital HIS systems, databases. On demand, they give some records to the patient, discharge summary, lab reports, etc. But I cannot go to the hospital and claim my data. I can request the CMO of the hospital that I want certain reports, certain data. They can provide me, but as a matter of policy, I cannot kind of claim like what you're doing with my data. You have to share this data with X, or you have to not share this data with Y, This kind of control I do not have at present. But NDHP clearly says that, a patient will be owner of data. Patient will decide, who the entities his data could be shared with, or what his data should be used for. And there will be enough security and privacy in the overall, framework to ensure the confidentiality of data, the integrity of data, and the privacy of data. And particularly the sensitive information of the citizens. These have to be ensured that sensitive information of the health records of the patient could be shared only to the providers to whom patient has a consent to share it with. Hospital cannot share it, by own. If data is residing in their database, it doesn't mean that they can do anything with the database, with that data. So one very basic principle of federated architecture is privacy and security of that data, confidentiality of data. The second thing is interoperability at the national level, and it requires a lot of technological flexibility and independence, because in country we cannot think like the whole country will adopt one single technology model. You will have applications built in n number of technologies, but there should be federation across those different technology models to integrate together with common interoperability patterns. So one common interoperability pattern you can see is what we are doing in the e-object space. So we are saying, whether you are using a .NET based application, whether you are using Java application, whether you are using microservice based application, but whenever these different applications are talking to each other, they should be generating the standard records in e-object format, and they should exchange with each other. So ultimately, we are not caring which technology these e-objects are generated from, but we have kind of standardized the format of records which are kind of exchanged with each other. So ideally, federated architecture is well suited for country like us, because health is a state subject in India, and center alone cannot take all the decisions related to health. States and centers together have to take the decision, and primarily states have to take the decision. So in this given size and conditions, federal setup is the big requirement for the country. So these are a few of the principles of federated architecture that have been enumerated in the NDHP report. So one of the thing is they are kind of bifurcating all the digital health data and applications under 3 levels. The level 1, they talk about the facilities. So the source of data, basically, where the data is generated, all the hospitals, diagnostics, labs, etc. The second level is the state level. So all these facilities, be it in public or be in private, all these facilities data will be kind of aggregated at the state level, and state will have the analytics, engine. So I will talk about health information exchange in the later of the day. The third level is the national level. So national level, so what they say is patient data will be held at the point of care or as close possible to the actual location where care is given. Citizen will be in the full control of processing of health data related to him or her. And system of records shall hold all the primary data. And other applications and entities will have access to it only through links subject to the applicable permissions and consent. Now, this is a very important point to remember. What they are trying to say is, system of records are the applications which are generating the data, like any health information system, any clinical information system, lab information system, etc., where patient gets the care and his data is generated and it is residing in that application. But all these other applications who want to have the access to that data, they will be accessing it through the links only. So this is a very important thing. So they are saying that the actual data will be residing still at the providers' systems. Only the pointers of that records will be exchanged and shared across. So if we are talking about PHR, for example, now this is very big confusion in our mind. We talk about personal health records repository. So whenever we talk about repository or database, a thing comes in our mind that, okay, we have a DICOM image file in our hospital database. Now, if it's a PHR, we will be kind of sharing that image and storing it in the PHR. So then what will happen? You will have a duplicacy of data. One set of data is maintained at the hospital database. The other copy of database is maintained in the same data is maintained in the PHR. Then we are talking about the data fiduciaries. We are saying that, that there can be some repositories, some EHR vendors who will be storing those records. acting like a data bank, and they will be applying all the privacy, security, consent on that data. So again, third copy of data will reside at those fiduciary databases. Now imagine one discharge summary or one radiology report is generated, or one CT image file is generated at the hospital A, and its multiple copies are generated across all the repositories. Then it will not serve the purpose, because you will have the duplication of the same data, and it will cause a data integrity challenges. So what federated architecture talks about is you have all the data residing at the system of records, but pointer of that record should be kept with all these other applications like PHR. PHR will hold all the record pointers, and whenever patient want to share his data from provider A to B, through these pointers he can those providers can access the records. So it is something like, okay, I have a key, so I have a locker basically, and in the locker I keep one of the file. Now I have the key to that locker. Now I can share this key to, or I can make multiple copies of that key, and I can give one copy of the key to each person whom I want to access that file. So my file is still kept with the locker. There are no multiple copies of the files created. Now whoever want to see my file, I will give him one copy of key. He will go and he will access that. So it is exactly in the same analogy. My records are in the hospital databases. The pointers of that record, which is like a key to that locker, will be available to the person whom I want to share my data with, and using that key, he can access my record. So that is a very fundamental thing they are talking about in federated architecture. Any questions here? And the other thing they are talking about is, all these links or kind of exchange that will subject to the applicable permissions and the consent of the patient. Now, larger facilities and government health organizations shall be data fiduciaries. For the smaller facilities who cannot who do not have the capacity to take the services of licensed health data repository. So what they are saying is, for example, all the sub-centers or kind of PSC or CSC. Now, most of them are very small in size, so they cannot maintain their own databases. So government is introducing the concept of data fiduciaries. So the smaller facilities data, instead of maintaining their databases, they can store their data at a larger facility level. For example, district hospital level or community healthcare level. Similarly, in the private space, for example, there are some small hospitals, 50-bed hospital or whatever, 100-bed hospital, and they don't want to maintain their own IT infrastructure. So instead of their own data center, they can ask some larger organization to store the data for them and can maintain the security of data for them. So these organizations will be assuming the role of data fiduciaries. And in our data protection bill, which is pending in Parliament, a lot of provisions are contained related to the data security part and how this data fiduciaries will play the role. So ultimately, data fiduciaries will act like a custodian of data, like bank act a custodian of your money. So basically, we kind of go and kind of deposit our money in a bank, in any account. Now bank, so we are kind of safe, my money is safe. Whenever I ask for that money, I can go and withdraw that money. Bank cannot refuse that I will not give your money back. And bank is responsible for ensuring the security of that money. While storing that, kind of whenever we are doing the transfer of money to another bank, again bank is responsible for ensuring the security of that money. Same way, bank is also responsible for not disclosing our account information to anyone else. And they can exchange our money only to the entities that whom we want to. So we will initiate the request for exchanging the money, sharing the money through NEFT or through IMPS, whatever. So they cannot go on their own. They cannot kind of share our money with anyone. Similar model they want to bring in the health. So they want to. So all these data fiduciaries will act like a bank. They will be so we will have the accounts opened with these data fiduciaries. Under our accounts, like we deposit our money, so we can deposit our data with them. They will be custodian of that data. They will be responsible for data security, privacy, everything related to our data. They cannot share this data without our permission, which is the electronic consent. And all the exchanges of that data, like the money exchange, will be highly secured. And again, data fiduciaries will be responsible for ensuring the security of that exchange. So this kind of model, financial model, federated architecture want to bring related to health. Raghav, any questions here? Raghav, anyone?
So,
yeah.
So when we say that the data fiduciaries will store our data from smaller organizations, so how will the smaller organizations provide that data to the higher level? How will they transfer or how will they share their data with them?
So ultimately, any application, if you see, and Ved was already covering that in his sessions, any application, you have different layers of that application. You have some front end side of that application which users access. Then you have a middleware or the business layer where all the logic is there, and then the database layer where data is stored. So one way is kind of, these different fiduciaries can provide some applications where they only allow the web interfaces to the users who are kind of using these applications, in the smaller facilities. Smaller facilities do not have their data center. They do not have the capacity to maintain their own applications or buy their own applications. Applications are applicable, available as a cloud SaaS model. So I will talk about the cloud services in another session. So those applications, the data stores and the databases are maintained by the respective fiduciaries. So all you have, so for example, you might have seen the Amazon or you might have seen different application you are using in your mobile, right? So rather if you are using the Amazon and you are placing some order, that order related data is not stored on your mobile or local to your device. That is just an interface provided to you, an app provided to you. But the actual data is stored in the Amazon data store. The same way, the smaller facilities, instead of owning their own application, they can be given some kind of apps or some kind of web applications which they can use in their facility and generate the data. But actual data storage will happen somewhere else, who will be maintaining the data storage part of that, and this data storage part will be maintained by the fiduciaries. So this way, even a smaller facility can ensure that its data is collected by the larger facility. So one thing is very clear, this data protection bill, it talks about certain responsibilities on part of data fiduciary, exactly like bank. So they will be responsible for data protection obligations, compliances, and clear clauses, laws that will be applicable. So you may read about this, general data protection bill. It's still pending in parliament, but some sooner or later it will be passed. So that defines about data fiduciaries, the roles and responsibilities, obligations, etc. So this is the proposed federated architecture in NDHB, what I'm talking about, and it has 3 layers. The first layer is the local layer, and citizen is more close to this layer because ultimately a patient always goes to the facility which is nearest to him. They either go to a public facility, which start from sub-center, primary healthcare, community healthcare, district hospital, teaching hospitals, medical colleges, or they come in the private part. They start with GP clinic, then secondary hospital, tertiary hospital, this kind of thing. So all these are local institutions basically. So the first layer is the local institution, and each layer they are talking about the 5-layer building blocks strategy. And this 5-layer thing, is the building blocks of the NDHP. I will talk more about it in the coming slides. So each layer, it is the same 5 layers. So it is basically 5+3 model. So 3 layers, which kind of bifurcating the architecture at 3 different layers: local layer, state layer, national layer. And there are certain differences in the 3 layer. For example, local layer will collect all the patient data, whatever data is generated in the clinical care of that patient, that will be stored at the local layer. But state layer doesn't require the kind of disclosure of that data, whose data this record belongs to basically. So they can either maintain the EHR records of the patient, all the aggregated records of the patient, or they can maintain the anonymized and deduplicated records of the patient, which can only be used for analytics. They don't require a very detailed case summary of the patient. They are not giving the treatment. Basically, at the state level, they want to do two things. One is aggregation of all the patient records to form his longitudinal records. And second thing is ensuring the analytics part of that. Because at the state level, they can take the health policy decision, data surveillance, disease surveillance, all these things. National level require even a lesser data. So no patient data at the national level, no kind of detailed, aggregated records of the patient, only the indicators related data. Because national level, they are interested only at the indicators. And already there are different applications used, by the health ministry. HMIS is one, DHIS2 is another. So DHIS2 basically is can be used for aggregating all the data and generate the patient indicators, MIS indicators out of that. For example, all the women given certain vaccine, for example. So basically, they only need the indicator, how many women have been given this vaccination. They don't actually need the details about the records of those, patients. So national level require a kind of indicator, aggregated indicator level data. But all these three different layers, you have the same building block structure, which I will talk about. So some of the things I've mentioned already. So one is now this one very basic question and confusion comes in the mind of people is where the anonymization of data should happen, where the consent of data should happen, whether it should happen at the place where aggregation is happening, or whether it should happen at the place where generation of records happening. So I give you one example. So let us say discharge summary of the patient is generated at the Fortis hospital. Now this is now discharge summary of a particular episode of that patient. Now the same patient can have multiple episode of treatments across different hospitals. So it is possible, like, I have one record in Fortis, another record in Max Healthcare, another record somewhere else. So each hospital maintain the episodic, care records of the patient related to the episodes. But then, if I want the aggregation of the records, if I want a longitudinal record of the patient, the summary record of the patient, care summary. So I need the multiple episodes of the same patient, which are done across the different hospitals. So in my case, for example, if I have taken the treatment in 3 hospitals, and the 3 hospitals I have, undergone different episodes of care. By the way, I think you all are aware of episode of care, right? Raghav, Akriti?
Yes, sir.
So, okay. So basically, some hospital, let us say I have a fever episode, I went there to get the care of a fever. The other hospital for some other medical condition, some other hospital, some other condition. Now, each hospital will have the individual records, individual episodes. But if you want to see my lifetime record, which is the longitudinal care record of my case, then we need to aggregate the records. So this aggregation will take place at the EHR level. And HI actually has a prime role to play in that, health information exchange. I will speak more about it later. Now, prime question can come is, where this anonymization of data should happen? Should it happen at the source of each hospital where record is generated? Or should it happen, when we are kind of aggregating the summary records? So NDHB talks about the principle that anonymization and consent management should happen at the point of care as much as possible, because most of the data pilferage in NDHB mind happens because of the administrators in the hospital. Because these administrators, lot of administrators are in hospital, like, and sorry to say, rather a lot of HMAs are there, health management managers basically in the hospital. And you all have done the, MBA degree from, your college. So basically, these managers are not giving the care to the patient. They are kind of managing the care processes within the hospital. These are kind sort of administrators. And these administrators are not directly involved with the care of the patient. They are not doctors. They are only managers. And so basically, if data is open in the database, these administrators also have the access to the patient records as well as the providers. So NDHB clearly says that only the providers who are involved in the care of the patient, who are giving the treatment to the patient, should have the access to the patient record. Rest of the people should not. So in that scenario, the administrator should also not have the access to the patient records, because if they have the access, my data privacy is leaked out there. So to sort out this problem, what they say is, anonymization and consent should happen right at the source where it is generated, rather than, at the aggregation point, because aggregation will happen somewhere at a different level. Each and every hospital who are maintaining the data, they should also be responsible for ensuring the privacy of the patient, security of the patient, and ensuring that patient has the authorization to share that data. Second thing they talk about is basically like each health data type, which include the master and transaction, it should be maintained at one level only. Now, this is a very important thing, and in that direction we are already working in. So currently we are working on the code directory, schemas, and kind of masters, value sets, those things. Now, what is the need of that? People already have the masters. All applications have the master tables. But NDHP clearly says there should be a single copy of the data, which we call as a golden records, and there's all the building. So basically, all the health data types, whether it is master or transaction, it should be maintained at one level only. There should not be any duplication. And to that context, even if the transaction data is there should not be multiple copies of that patient. It should not happen that I have a discharge summary in hospital record, same discharge summary is loaded in a PHR, same record is copied in the fiduciary database. It should not happen. There should only be one copy. So if there is any updation in the copy, it should be at the one place only. Otherwise, data integrity will be challenged. So same way, all the masters, I should have a single source where I can reference all the master tables. It should not happen like each and every application is maintaining their own master. Some is putting M or F for the male or female gender codes. Some is putting 1 or 0. And, one of our SCA member, COE member, Sumita, she used to say that RB is, RBSY scheme, it had more than 16 type of gender codes. Because whoever application they were integrating with, they were adding those codes in the masters. So it is happening because each application is maintaining their own masters. So NDHP says there should be one single copy. Now, EMR maintained at the facility level and EHR as a longitudinal record of patient across facilities as collection of links of the primary data. Now, this already I've talked about this. Clearly there is a distinction between EMR and EHR. Can someone tell me what is EMR and what is EHR? Raghav, Akriti, anyone?
Sir, EHR is a longitudinal record from birth till death, EHR, and it is the record from for whole lifetime, wherever whichever health facility we visit, all the records are at one place when it is an EHR. And in EMR, it is from a single facility, the record of that particular facility is EMR, and then from another facility, it will consist of its own medical record of that patient. So that's an EMR.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, EMR is a single episode of the care, what I spoke about. But EHR is a kind of aggregation of all the episodes of the same patient across the provider organization. So EHR is generated by aggregating all the records of the same patient. So what they are saying is EMR data is maintained by the facility, but EHR data will be maintained across the facility. So someone will take the responsibility of aggregating those records. So whether this responsibility will come with the data fiduciaries, as I spoke about, because they are at a different level than the provider organizations, or this responsibility will come with the patient himself in the form of PHR, patient health repository. So what they're saying is all these longitudinal records or aggregation, it will be maintained as collection of links to the primary data. So I've already spoken about, like these different aggregating entities need not be kind of getting the copies of the records and kind of accumulating it. They can just store the pointers of the records. And kind of you have a pointer of all record, like this patient has treatment in 3 hospitals. and if you have pointer of records of all these 3 different hospitals, you can at request, you can fetch the record from the different hospital after patient consent and provide it to the another provider. So you need not to ensure the kind of duplication of record. Although in practicality, this in theory it sounds good. Technically, like it sounds good that we will only maintain the pointer, but in real life, we have the practical challenges as well. So what uh, is a kind of much better option is a hybrid model. So hybrid model means the PHR or the fiduciaries, they should have the pointers as well as some minimum clinical data, like last 5 episodes or last 2 episodes, sort of thing. Because most of the time, we are not assuming that you already know internet is a big problem in the country. So if you're kind of aggregating the data at the runtime every time, you're kind of sending the request to the entities, you have the pointers, and based on the pointers, you are fetching the record. So it requires the internet always online. Now, if online is not available, service is not available, internet is down, and patient need to access his health records. He's sitting in front of doctor. He want to show his previous records to the patient, to that doctor, and internet is down, so he will not be able to see. So the best approach is last 2 visit data or last 5 visit data, whatever is suitable, his diagnosis, his encounters, his allergies, some identifiable records which are required for the treatment of the patient. Those could be stored in the repositories along with the links to rest of the data, or all the data. But whenever any updation will happen in the database, it will always refresh the data, basically, that copy of the data. So one of the example in Rajasthan government was they provided a mechanism to store the last 2 visit data of the patient on a small chip, NFC card. So NFC is a standard for storing the data and exchanging the data using mobile chips. So basically, what happens is in Rajasthan, the common problem is you have the desert side villages. You cannot assume internet always be available up and down. So their IT team took a decision that instead of kind of always ensuring that you get the record from somewhere and you assume internet is always online, you provide a offline storage of that record in the form of a chip, and you always store the last 2 visit of the patient in there. So that patient goes from one facility to another. He can show his card. There will be a card reader. It will read the card. So it will authenticate the patient. It will read the record. And then whatever doctor gave him the treatment in that visit, that will be updated. So ultimately, it will always contain the last 2 visit record only. So always your last 1 visit will be overwritten. It will always be refreshed to the latest visit. So this is also a good model. So here the federated architecture is a little confusion, because what they say is it should only contain the collection of pointers of the records. Actual record should be at the source. But in practicality, it doesn't make a sense, because it is not US kind of conditions where you always assume internet is up, or kind of you will always be able to aggregate the records at the runtime. So we should also provide some offline mechanisms, some minimal record storage in the PHR or in the EHR repositories, like last 2 visits, for example. Then other thing what NDHP says is the system of allocating and managing the UHID, Universal Health Identifier. They should be maintained centrally at the national level. So what they mean to say is all the identifier allocation should be done by the central registries. So it's a very clear-cut thing. All the registries will be maintained centrally. So these registries include the patient registry, which you can also say is the beneficiary registry. Some places we call it client registry. Some places we call it master person index. So I will talk more about it in an HI thing. Then we need the facility registries. We need the provider registries, doctor registries, health worker registries, sort of, disease registries, and so on and so forth. So all the registries which are providing the identifiers, it should be at the central level. Otherwise, portability will become an issue. If each state start providing their own state-specific identifier, now patient can port from one state to another. He's free to move anywhere inside the country. There is no citizenship per state. It's a citizenship at the national level. So I can go and reside anywhere in the country. So if only particular state give me, for example, Haryana provide me one identifier, then my records are only contained to Haryana. If Haryana is maintaining a registry, then if I go to some other state, Maharashtra, then that I have to get another identifier for this. So I will have multiple identifiers otherwise. If we want to have a unique identifier across the nation, we need the central registry. So what NDHP says is the system of allocation and management of all the IDs should be at the central level, at the national level. So we need kind of authorities like the UIDI. Before starting the Aadhaar project, they created authority, UIDI, with a kind of semi-administrative power. So basically, only then Aadhaar registry could be completed. Same model, we need to get the authorities for other registry work as well. Then at the national level, there will be no health records maintained for the individual. So this I have already covered. Like national level, they only want the aggregation and the indicator level data. And then a repository of standards, APIs, metadata, and data dictionaries is maintained at the national level. All other entities should be able to access those records based on their requirement. Now, this is something we are doing now. So we are kind of publishing the schema files for all the NDDS elements and all the code directories. But this has to be maintained at the central level because this is a repository of standards, or whatever terminology related APIs need to be published, or data dictionaries need to be published. So those kind of work has to be published at the central level, national level. And then all other entities, architects, application designers, they should be kind of downloading these standards from a single place. Otherwise, you do kind of that then we will have disharmonization across the standards. So these are the building blocks of NDHB and building blocks in past also. So I will like it more interactive this time. So the first thing, yeah, please.
So I have a question. So who will be feeding the data in the EMR or EHR? Who will be adding that? The doctors will add that data.
Basically, so always doctor give the care to the patient. So when adding the record to the EMR is concerned, it's always the doctor. So whenever doctor is giving any order to the patient, is giving a discharge summary to the patient, those records are updated in the EMR of that system. Another thing Federated Architecture talks about is there should be technology layers which should allow to exchange the data with other entities. So it is purely the technology layer. So for example, this whatever data is stored in the EMR, there should be a way of aggregating that records using the record pointers. Now that mechanism will be done, cannot be done by a human being. That has to be done by the HI, Health Information Exchange. So we need a health information exchange at the national level. In fact, not a single instance of the exchange. We need a federated exchange model. We need multiple exchanges like Bharti Telecom, your Idea, so many Geo, so many telephone exchanges are there. And all these exchanges should be there to allow the exchange of the records and should be allowing the aggregation of that record to form EHR. So who will be adding primarily? Always addition is done by doctor. And it is always adding in the EMR first. The rest is always aggregation or sharing of that same record. So the first layer, the bottommost layer of the NDHP is the infrastructure layer that talks about. And as I shown you here, like even in this layer, national, state, or local, all the three layers have the same layered approach, building blocks. You have the same infrastructure, data, technology, application building blocks at all the four layers. Only there can be multiple permutation and combinations and usages of those building blocks. It can be different. So the first thing they talk about is the health cloud. Now, MIT will be responsible for developing these health clouds. They will be, and these are kind of the government community cloud project initiative. It's part of the government cloud initiative. And primarily all the data management of the, at least the primary facility, public facilities, all the data storage part at the state level or at the national level, all the public facilities related data has to be managed by the mighty owned health clouds. And they will be responsible for providing all the security and privacy policies, all the controls, all the data centers, cloud, VMs, whatever storages are required in networking, etc., whatever. They will have their own data center. We call it edge cloud. So why it is termed as edge cloud? Why it's not a simple cloud? Because they are talking about certain more controls. They are talking about anonymization, deduplication, some layers of security, privacy, consent, digital signatures, e-consent. So normally in any cloud, like AWS cloud or any other cloud, Azure, they do not provide all these controls. They provide the data and security related controls, but they do not provide particularly like consent or those kind of things. So we have to ensure all the health specific security controls to be implemented across the clouds, which are storing the data. So they call it health cloud basically. Then, secure health networks. So ultimately, they say like, whenever the access to the aggregated data is required, for example, you are connecting to the different entities, provider systems, for example, their EMRs, and you are aggregating the records. So you need the secure VPN channel. You should have a gateway server at each hospital, for example. And the traffic between the EHR repository and the provider system should be secure. It should be enough encrypted. So it should not be a general internet. Because I think Ved can explain it much better to all of you. There are a lot of hackers in the country. As a hacker, they can always hack, whatever data is being accessed whenever you are accessing any website or anything. Most of the hackers can even access, what you're trying to access. So they can access all the data packets, and it's in the transport layer, in the network transport layer. So government specifically want to ensure the transport level security, and all these health networks should be secure VPN or MPLS clouds. So different networking models are there to ensure that all the aggregation of data or all the access to the data is done in a secure connectivity way. And NHP clearly talks that for all the telehealth applications, teleradiology applications, particularly which require the PACS image transfer, we require the dedicated, VLANs. We call it virtual LANs basically, or wide area networks. So, for example, our normal network segments are at 100 Mbps. 100 Mbps is a very good, network capacity. But for the image transfer part in the hospital, you require 1000 Mbps kind of thing, because you need a high resolution image viewer. At least PACS workstations at the radiology centers should be high resolution. So generally in hospitals, what we do is we create a dedicated separate network segment for the radiology center, which is at a 1000 Mbps speed. And rest of the hospital is at the 100 Mbps speed. The same way, they want to ensure that for all the teleradiology, telehealth related things, they want to provide the dedicated, networks to ensure that, the PACS latency problems are solved. Right now in India, the common challenge is the bandwidth problem. The network bandwidth is very low, and transferring the huge images across the network is a big problem. All those things are part of the secure health network design that government is planning. The third thing they talk about is the Security and Privacy Operations Center. We call it SOC. So they are saying that, okay, health cloud is storing all the data. Private segment, there will be private clouds. Somewhere there will be hybrid clouds also, where public entity related data is stored in the government cloud, but private related data is stored in the private cloud. A lot of interaction across the clouds are happening. So you need a lot of security of the cloud, and whatever events related to the cloud and network happens, those need under the 24/7 secure monitoring. So they are kind of suggesting a very robust surveillance mechanism to detect each and every data byte transmission. Now, this is a very ambitious project, but what their thought process is, each and every data packet that is exchanged should be under the security scanner. And if there is any breach of security, for example, somebody tried to tamper the data packets or unauthorized access the data, or somewhere consent was not provided, even those kind of breaches should be recorded electronically. Now, this can happen only when you have a AI and ML based security operation control, which kind of monitor all the network transmissions of the data packets, and each and every data packet they are monitoring the breaches. And then data protection bill clearly talks whenever there is a breach, the entity who is responsible will be kind of will be penalized. So in case of
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, because when we used to work on Epic and all in Bangalore, they used to have these secured networks, and that is why some people even who are just supporting the application should be sitting in Bangalore or Chennai, right? So do you think our government is also going, because once the Data Protection Act comes in, they have to follow the protected network? Who is going to enable that? Are we also going to have those dedicated network for health data transmission?
Yeah, definitely. So basically, if you see the Max example, Dr. Pankaj and I was there. So we recommended the MPLS cloud network for all the 12 branches of the Max hospital. So MPLS was the same, secure network. And same way, some different hospitals, they are ensuring the VPN based secure cloud access network. So these private hospitals they manage their own secure data centers and networks. But in case of so same way, so as you gave the Epic example, so Epic had an office in Bangalore or somewhere, and they were maintaining it. Going forward, what they're saying is at least the state level, national level data, and all the public entity related data that will be managed by the MIT, NIC or MIT or both. So they will be responsible for setting up the data centers. They will be responsible for setting up the secure networks and kind of operationalizing that, monitoring that. And then private entities will be kind of responsible for storing data in their own clouds, but they have to follow the similar data security and controls basically, and the network controls.
So if just because we are part of Access Health, and we also need to know what are the security components that we need, and what are the different things that we need to actually have that private secure network. So will you be able to give us those components कि अगर वो हमें line बनानी है तो हमें क्या ensure करना है from a technological component perspective? What are the minimum things that we need to have to keep that network running, protected network running?
So definitely, Priyanka. So if you're aware, I'm already working on one document. So in that part, I'm already covering the data privacy, security, consent, everything in detail. So here, but the question you have is basically I'm documenting all the data privacy, security, network related controls, consent related controls that are minimum required as per the NDHP guidelines. So those could be referred by the rest of our SCA members and other private entities.
Okay, sir.
So once this SOC comes in, basically, the SOC will be acting like a kind of a monitoring regulation, regulatory, like in US, you have the HIPAA laws basically, and they are very strictly kind of observing the HIPAA. And whenever there are breaches in the HIPAA, there are the provisions of penalizing even the doctors. So same way they want to introduce this SOC model. This SOC model will ensure, and there will be enough technical controls implemented, which will monitor all the data transfers. And with each data transfer, they will see, for example, that this is digitally signed or not. This data network layer is TLS, we call it TLS basically, TLS or SSL supported. This is network transport level security. Then consent document is there for the, consent electronic document is associated or not. So those kind of different controls will be monitored. And if there is any breach, this will be recorded with the source. And then, based on that, they plan to take the HIPAA-like violation related provisions, basically, which have been defined in the data protection layer. The second layer in the NDHP report, building blocks, is data hub layer. Now, data hub layer is the layer sitting on top of infrastructure layer. So, infrastructure covers all your cloud, containers, your network, storage, etc. Data hub is actual data, which is generated by all these different applications. So basically, Data Hub provide all those building blocks which are fundamentally responsible for managing the key entities, standardizing the data. So whenever we are saying the standardizing the data, here comes the role of code directories, value sets, then MDDS, because all the data in interoperability has to carry the common meaning of data. So whatever way you store the data, but at least in the exchange packet, whenever you are interoperating that data, you should have the same common format of data, so that data could be understood by all other applications. So for this, there are three things NDHP talks about. So one of the thing is they talk about health data dictionary and registries. So primarily in health data dictionary, they talk about all the standards related to code directories, master data, metadata, which is the MDDS thing we are already working on. And then the registries are the source of all identifiers. So we have already spoken about like different registries are required at the national level. So this work is primarily to ensure. So why identifiers are required is because unless you have the common global identifiers, there will be challenges of relating the records together. The local identifiers have to give the way out, and it has to be replaced by some unique identifier. Even if you have multiple identifiers, these multiple identifiers should be indexed by a unique identifier. So somebody is using PAN card, somebody is using voter card, somebody is using Aadhaar card, but all these three different cases should be somewhere interlinked. So you need kind of a global identifier mapping to all these three different identifiers. So that is the work of registry. And in Access, we have already done the minimum viable data element definition of the registries. We will also provide the API interactions to these registries, how the APIs will be required to interact. So for example, in health information exchange, whenever a patient is registered, so there should be an interaction with the master person index, which we call as a beneficiary registry, to look up the patient record there and to get the global ID of that patient. So if patient is existing already in the master person index, it will return the global ID, patient ID of that patient. We call it UHID. If it doesn't, then it will create the record in the MPI and return the master UHID. So those API interactions we are working on and we will provide. And then they're clearly saying that all these different registries should be storing the minimum details to generate the IDs. For example, the person or beneficiary registry, it should store demographic and location identifier data, family relationship data, contact details, and they are kind of recommending FHIR specification to be followed in developing the scheme of these registries. So FHIR person resource or patient resource can be used with some customizations for Indian requirement. So that can be one way of defining the patient registry schema. And then ability to update the information should be easy. So there should be mechanism to update the registries. For example, in other registry, we can go and we can change our mobile number. It is a very easy process. Third thing they talk about is EHR. So basically, this whole data, and we have already covered this point, that EMR records are stored at the provider facility level, but aggregated records, we need the aggregation of records to generate the EHR record of the patient. And for this, we need the record pointers, which are maintained by the PHR or the Fiduciary repositories. So here they kind of proposing a ecosystem model where different players can play the role and they can work on the national interoperability standards for sharing of health data. So the content of the EHR has to be standardized. So what they are saying is in the facility level, your EMR data can have the basic content with very little metadata. But whenever you are exchanging that record with other entity, it should have a strong structured content which meet the standard. And this strong structured content we are already working in Access Health. We are already designing the provider e-objects, payer side e-objects. All these e-objects are the standard structured content templates for transmitting the data. So whatever way you are storing the data, but whenever you are transmitting the data, these containers have to be followed. These containers itself have the standards constrained within that, and that will take care of all the MDDS thing also. So ultimately, e-object is a big work in the direction of standardizing the interoperability data. Third layer of NDHP is the technology layer. Now they say this layer is kind of ever evolving. Many things will come. Many more technical building blocks will be added. But some of the building blocks they have mentioned. But whatever building blocks they have mentioned is not a kind of final list basically. So what I'm trying to say is an evolving list. So one thing that talks about is the health DigiLocker, which is a PHR. So certain principles NDHP talks about the PHR design. One is it has to be a standard-based interoperability specification to enable the creation of PHR ecosystem. So two things they talk about. One is either the health fiduciaries data fiduciaries can store the data. They can help in aggregating the patient records. So they will have the record locator services. They will have the HI technical controls. So that whenever on demand somebody wants the summary record of the patient, they can generate the aggregation. They can aggregate the record and they can generate the summary. Or else patient himself can store his data in his PHR. PHR is like a DigiLocker. So already MIT has given a DigiLocker specification, and this is available on public domain. So they talk about multiple issuers, multiple users. So they say there can be multiple universities. I can get my educational records, and I can link it to my DigiLocker, and then I can share it with multiple other users. So the same DigiLocker can be extended to form the PHR design for the country. This is what NDHB talks about. So they are saying one thing they are saying is standards have to be complied with. Other thing they are saying is whenever a medical record need to be issued, like in the DigiLocker design, they are not actually storing the copy of the record. They are storing the payload of that record in the XML format or something with the link to the previous organization server basically where the actual record is maintained. So for example, your actual record is in the facility, in the hospital facility, but there is a pointer which is kind of pointing to that actual record. So all these reference links can be shared with the locker ecosystem. So it's kind of a aggregation of all the all the links basically. And whenever somebody want to see the records based on the patient consent, using the links, he can actually send the request to those providers and get the record at the real time. Then small clinics or hospitals can subscribe to the authorized providers basically who can integrate with Health Locker to be able to participate in this ecosystem. Now, our SCA members are already working in this design. Unimagnet is already working in that. So small clinics or hospitals, basically, we can implement some technical control, like they have done a pusher control. So they can subscribe to some authorized repository providers where patient PHR repositories can be created, and they can store the medical images of the patient and other clinical records of the patient in those repositories. So ultimately, these health lockers will enable the creation of longitudinal record of the patient, and it provide the EHR to the provider in the real time basically. And health information exchange will be the technical backbone which will be acting in the background basically. So I will talk about some of the HIE controls in the afternoon session today. So one more thing that talks about very clearly is like this health locker thing should do two things basically. One is it should allow the processing of request for correction of health data, number one. And second is citizen should be able to revoke his consent, which they call as a right to be forgotten. So, for example, patient has given a consent to share his record. So, besides the consenting mechanism, there should be a mechanism of revoking that consent also. So, if I have sent one record to, let us say, Dr. Lal Lab with my consent, so it doesn't mean like Dr. Lal will always contain my record. There should be a way like, okay, I have decided a timeline, for example, ki, okay, for this day only, till they prepare my lab report, Dr. Lal can carry my record, then it should be revoked. So either it can be a time period based, or it can be, at my will. Whenever I want to revoke explicitly, I can go and revoke it. So PHR should have this capability where I can go and revoke my consent, and based on the consent revocation, whatever records I had shared with that provider should be automatically deleted from there. So that is one, control they are talking about. The other control they are talking about is whenever they want to do the correction of the health data, there should be a way of sending the request to the providers for the same. Now, this has a clinical consequences also, because I don't know, the patient will be able to send the request to the provider that correct my data, but this is the way it is written in the NDH. Any questions here?
Sir?
Yeah.
So when we talk about the EHR, we are saying that at a fiduciary level, we will aggregate the EMR data and form an EHR.
Yeah.
Okay. And when we consider that we will be having a PHR DigiLocker, so sir, what is the need of aggregation at the fiduciary level? When we can have data pointers at our PHR or in our DigiLocker?
Okay. So generally, if you see the objective of these two, the objective of both PHR and the fiduciary is to share the data, but with a different perspective. PHR is sort of a agreement between the provider organizations to share the data basically. So, for example, Fortis, Apollo, and Dr. Lal Lab, they want to make a collaboration together that we will be collaborating all the business cases. We'll be sharing the patient records together. So, same way, now this Fortis wants ki my records, instead of storing in my data center, it will be stored on some fiduciary. So again, that is an agreement between fiduciary and the provider organization, that hospital, Fortis in this case. Patient has no role to play here. So what I'm trying to say, the EHR from a fiduciary perspective is always an agreement between the fiduciary and the hospital directly. And kind of there will be an exchange of, so there's a referral mechanism, for example. Now, doctor want to refer the record from Fortis, let us say Saket branch to Fortis Mohali branch, for example. So in that case, all these records are still maintained in their local databases. Fortis Mohali has a database, Fortis Saket has a database. So in that case, they should have a mechanism like they can exchange the patient record from one hospital branch to another hospital branch with the patient consent. The other scenario is where patient himself has the control and he can share his record with any provider based on his requirement. It's like his wallet. So I have my wallet. I have kept my personal records in that. Now I want to share. So let us say doctor has issued a discharge summary to me. This discharge summary has some medications and all this thing also, a prescription as well. Or maybe I have a prescription document. This is uploaded in my PHR. Now I want kind of drug refill, online drug refill. So I will share my prescription copy with that drug refill company. They will be kind of refilling my drug at a scheduled period. Similarly, I want to get my lab report done by the Dr. Lal lab, and they want to see my doctor prescription first, so I can share my doctor prescription with them. So this is a patient controlled mechanism. So the question you were asking is, the intent of both EHR, fiduciary, and the PHR both is same, sharing of the records. Both are acting the same role. But EHR is more from a provider perspective. Hospitals have a role there. PHR is more patient control. Raghav, does I answer? Yeah.
EHR में भी तो patient consent हम मांग ही रहे हैं.
लेकिन उसके लिए फिर आपको पहले हॉस्पिटल से जाना पड़ेगा ना. EHR रिक्वेस्ट इज ऑलवेज जनरेटेड फ्रॉम द हॉस्पिटल साइड.
तो एक हॉस्पिटल दूसरे हॉस्पिटल को रिक्वेस्ट देगा कि
ओके, सो आई गिव यू अनदर एग्जांपल. अभी तो OPD क्लेम्स नहीं है कंट्री में, बट at a point of time NHA will take the OPD claims and everything also. So OPD claims generally work at the reimbursement model. So first I get the treatment, I pay from my pocket, and then I can reimburse from the insurance company. So if that is a model, so they generally when I'm submitting my reimbursement claim, they ask me to submit all the clinical documents also, right? So as a patient, आज की डेट में क्या होता है? आज की डेट में I go to the hospital, I collect all the document, I make the scan copy of those documents, and then I submit it to the insurance company or TPA, and they pay my reimbursement. This is the current scenario. So if I have a PHR, so so all those records will be available. So I will give the consent to my hospital. Okay, share all these records in my PHR. This is my PHR address. So they have to exchange the copy to the PHR. Now this will be mandatory as per NDHP. They cannot say no. So whatever discharge summary is generated, whatever treatment summary is generated, lab investigations are done, radiologies are done. So everything they will load to my PHR. So either a copy of that or a pointer of that is a technical thing to discuss. So my PHR has a source of all the pointers, records basically. Now I want to share it with the insurance company. So I'll be simply sharing, those pointers with the insurance company, URLs. And using that URL, the insurance company का जो adjudication engine होगा, that can automatically retrieve all the documents and they can adjudicate my claim. तो ये मेरे कंट्रोल में है. अब अगर आपने बोला कि why EHR should not be done, तो EHR तो हॉस्पिटल के कंट्रोल में है ना. वो तो फिर मुझे again I have to go to hospital, I have to put the request, they will oblige it. So ultimately NDHP ने जो clear difference किया है वो ये किया है कि patient is the owner of data. So along with hospitals, patient can also be involved in the EHR. So it's like your passbook. So passbook में क्या होता है कि if all the transactions that you are doing in the bank, you are maintaining in a passbook copy, which is maintained in your wallet, and then you can track each and every transaction, whatever were done in the different branches. अभी मैंने अलग-अलग ATM से जाके transactions किया, withdrawal किया, but I have the single passbook statement where I can see all the records, and based on that I can track कि कहाँ पे कौन-कौन सी transactions हुई. So patient has a control. This is the extra element they want to introduce. I understand कि PHR is a redundant concept, to be honest. अगर EHR है तो PHR की जरूरत क्या है? But EHR और PHR को लाने का एक ही फर्क है कि EHR is more under the control of hospitals, and they want to provide PHR to be as something in the control of patient also.
Sir?
Yeah, Raghu.
सर जैसे EHR is under the control of the hospital, तो अगर normal patient किसी लैब के पास जाता है अपना टेस्ट कराने या GP के पास जाता है, तो वो डेटा EHR में स्टोर होगा या नहीं होगा?
देखो जो डाटा पेशेंट के पास आया है, अच्छा अब वही राजस्थान वाला एग्जांपल लेते हैं. राजस्थान में इफ दे आर प्रोवाइडिंग अ चिप टू ईच पेशेंट and they say कि your last 2 visit data will be stored in this chip, तो वो चिप कुछ नहीं है, वो चिप PHR ही तो है. That chip itself is a PHR. लेकिन अगर चिप में PHR है, इसका मतलब ये तो नहीं है कि वो उस रिकॉर्ड का कुछ करेंगे नहीं. At a point of time, they will be syncing up this data with some cloud server, और फिर बैकएंड में जो उनके क्लिनिकल सिस्टम्स होंगे, जैसे वो OM के सिस्टम लगे हुए हैं, वहां तो रिकॉर्ड होगा ना उसका. बट उन्होंने पेशेंट को वो चिप दे दिया साथ में कि भाई तुम जब जा रहे हो दूसरे सब सेंटर में जा रहे हो, तो एटलीस्ट you are not having any dependency on OM product or any HIS product. डॉक्टर को वहां तुम्हारा रिकॉर्ड नहीं देखना पड़ेगा. You have the chip, कार्ड रीडर से तुम्हारा पता चल जाएगा. तो when I'm saying PHR, it doesn't mean कि मतलब ये कोई इलेक्ट्रॉनिक रिपोजिटरी होगी और तुम्हारा हमेशा वो मतलब वैसे ही होगा. It can be a card also, smart card also, can be a chip storage as well. और वो तुम्हारे कंट्रोल में होना चाहिए. That record should be with you, and you have the control कि भाई तुम किसके साथ शेयर करना चाहते हो. तो पीएचआर में अगर डाटा है तो वो ईएचआर में भी होगा ऑब्वियसली, एंड वो किसी ना किसी हॉस्पिटल सिस्टम में भी सेव होगा, बट दैट इज ए काइंड ऑफ अ कॉपी प्रोवाइडेड टू द पेशेंट कि पेशेंट जैसे किसी के पास भी वॉलेट कार्ड है तो जहाँ भी अपना कैरी कर रहा है तो इफ यू वांट टू शो दोज रिकॉर्ड्स तो यू कैन एक्सेस देम।
ठीक है सर।
So ultimately, health information exchange is the big requirement to integrate all these EHR, PHRs, etc. नहीं तो हम interoperability की बात तो कर रहे हैं, but right now we are always talking about point to point only. अब ये aggregation जो होगा ना, whether this aggregation is done by the PHRs, by the chip cards, or by the fiduciaries, you clearly need a national level interoperability model. You cannot do a point to point web service based kind of model. तो उसमें तो EHR तो mandatory है. Without EHR, तो this all thing cannot happen at all. So EHR and EHR को करने के लिए you need the health information exchange. So certain things they talk about कि we have to use the open API standards for data exchange. Then all the authentication, authorization of data exchange should be well authenticated. And if only after authorization the request should be routed to the providing applications. क्रॉस चैनल कैपेबिलिटीज होनी चाहिए कि पेशेंट उसको अलग अलग तरीके से रिकॉर्ड को एक्सेस कर सके, डॉक्टर अलग अलग तरीके से एक्सेस कर सके, फॉर एग्जांपल वेब से कर सके, मोबाइल से कर सके, चिप कार्ड से कर सके, चिप कार्ड रीडर से कर सके, तो डिफरेंट क्रॉस चैनल कैपेबिलिटी शुड बी देयर. Then they talk about health analytics. So ultimately, on top of health information exchange, the state and the national level particularly, they should be able to aggregate all the data, either using a subscription model or a push model. तो basically ये technical terms है. Subscription model का मतलब तो ये होता है कि आपने सोर्स ऑफ डाटा, जैसे कहीं पे डाटा स्टोर्ड है, वहां पे आपने सब्सक्राइब कर लिया अपने आप को, जैसे आप किसी मैगजीन को सब्सक्राइब करते हो या न्यूज़पेपर को सब्सक्राइब करते हो, कॉमन एग्जांपल. तो व्हेनेवर द न्यूज़पेपर वी सब्सक्राइब टू अ न्यूज़पेपर वेंडर, उसका बंदा हर दिन जो न्यूज़पेपर की कॉपी हमारे घर में देके जाता है. तो सेम वे अगर हमने कोई मैगजीन को सब्सक्राइब किया हुआ है, तो इफ यू हैव सब्सक्राइब टू ए ऑनलाइन मैगजीन, every month on a fixed date we will get a copy of that magazine. So we are kind of subscribers. So same way, either analytical engines जो data lakes होंगी basically, so they can be subscribed to the different data sources. And ये mandatory होगा basically. तो इसमें जो गवर्नमेंट का प्रिंसिपल है वो ये है कि you cannot take a choice कि मैं allow करूंगा या नहीं करूंगा. तो NDHP clearly says कि all the provider sources which are storing the data or fiduciaries, they will be mandatorily be the subscribing agencies to the government. तो उनको तो चाहिए सारा एनालिटिक्स का डाटा. और दूसरा मॉडल जो होगा वो पुश मॉडल हो सकता है कि फॉर एग्जांपल एनएचए का केस है कि एनएचए में स्टेट लेवल एनएचए जो है उसका एसएचए स्टेट, एंड दे आर जनरेटिंग ऑल द क्लेम्स एंड देन दे आर पुशिंग ऑल द क्लेम डाटा टू अ स्टेट लेवल डाटा लेक एट ए पीरियड ऑफ टाइम. तो हर शाम को जो है या हर दिन में 2 बार सारा डाटा पुश कर देंगे क्लेम का, फिर वो डाटा सारा क्लेम प्रोसेस हो जाएगा, उसके एनालिटिकल रिपोर्ट जनरेट हो जाएंगी एंड दैट रिपोर्ट विल बी अवेलेबल टू ऑल द यूजर्स. So one is the push model, the other is the subscribe model, and data has to be mandatorily sent to the government. Then GIS visualization, ये एक नई चीज इन्होंने बोली है जो कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर में ऑलरेडी होती है. यू ऑलरेडी सी द स्विगी एंड जोमेटो. तो आपको पता होता है ना कि ऑर्डर लेके जब वो बंदा चला है तो वो भी दिखता होता है आइकन में कहाँ आ गया, कितना पास आ गया. So generally you have the maps and you can locate where my nearest doctor is, where my nearest lab is, nearest ambulance is, and then you can track की plotting of disease conditions क्या है. जैसे अभी ये COVID condition है, so if we have a mobile app kind of thing which can show me कि how many sensitive patients are around my locality, तो भाई उनसे तो बच के रहूंगा ना कम से कम. तो China has already built one application जहाँ पे वो they are recording the body temperature of the patient. तो कल एक I saw one link in our COE. So those kind of application we can capture the body temperature of the person, and if it is beyond a certain threshold level, it should be notifying to all. इस एरिया में इतने बंदे हैं. So those kind of things you need the GIS capabilities. So these are certain technical things, which NDHP talks about. Then there are more controls like anonymizer. So there are two things they are saying. One is the anonymization, the other is the deduplication. So I want to tell you one thing कि anonymization is a irreversible process. दोनों का काम एक ही है कि you have the patient record. उस patient record में से आपने patient का नाम हटा दिया, you have removed the mobile number of the patient, you have removed the address of the patient. तो क्या होगा कि अब तुम्हें ये नहीं पता कि ये किसका रिकॉर्ड है. You have kind of jumbled those things. अब पेशेंट के नेम की जगह आपने लिख दिया XYZ मिस्टर X, तो आपको नहीं पता ये कौन है. He's kind of Rahul Gandhi or Shah Rukh Khan. So ultimately the objective is to hide the patient identity. But the only difference in anonymization and deduplication is कि anonymize एक बार कर दिया, अब आप उस डाटा सेट को वापस रिकवर नहीं कर सकते. You cannot retrieve back. आपने परमानेंटली जो है उसके आइडेंटिफायर्स को रिमूव कर दिया है. लेकिन डीडुप्लीकेशन में क्या होता है कि आपके आइडेंटिफायर वहीं रहते हैं, आप उनको सिर्फ मास्क कर देते हैं. You only encrypt it. And you have a decryption algorithm also. If you want to recover it back, तो आप वापस से उनके आइडेंटिफायर्स को रिकवर कर सकते हैं. तो उसका एक बेस्ट एग्जांपल ये है कि मान लो मैं कोई डाटा सेट ई ऑब्जेक्ट में भेजना चाहता हूँ बिटवीन हॉस्पिटल ए टू बी. तो हॉस्पिटल ए ने पहले वो डी आइडेंटिफाई कर दिया, उसमें सारे पेशेंट की जो डेमोग्राफिक वाला सेक्शन है उसको पूरा उन्होंने एनक्रिप्ट कर दिया और उसको भेज दिया. उसके बाद में जब वो एनएचए के पास जाएगा वो डाटा या उसके पास वो प्रोवाइडर and they can take all the information again. So you need a de-identification mechanism. अगर anonymize कर दोगे तो फिर तो दोनों एक बार हो जाएगा तो फिर नहीं दिखेगा. So generally we prefer the de-identification thing. So when they say anonymizer, तो वो दो चीजें बोलते हैं उसके अंदर. तो बोलते हैं कि at the source होना चाहिए कि wherever data is generated, it should be anonymized. Second thing they say कि अगर small facility है and they cannot afford to have the technology, तो anonymizer as a service हम cloud पे भी develop कर सकते हैं. तो I think as a access help, we can develop this anonymizer as a service specification. And this can be a cloud service. Some of our SE member can develop it, so all other providers can use it. And then ultimately anonymization का scope बोलते हैं कि it should be anonymizing data, it should be deduplicating data, it should be re-identifying data, and then it should have all the encryption decryption algorithms. So this all these technologies come as part of the anonymization. And one more thing they say is कि जब भी health locker से patient अपना data exchange करेगा, तो anonymizer will take all the data from the health locker. It will remove all the identifier, personally identifier information, and then it will send the anonymized data to the requester. तो जैसे मान लीजिए कि लैब रिपोर्ट किसी को भेजनी है या कुछ करना है, तो उसमें से जो भी जितना इंफॉर्मेशन पेशेंट चाहता है उसको हाइड करना, दैट शुड बी द कंट्रोल अवेलेबल विद द पेशेंट. आई वांट टू हाइड so and so things from there. And then anonymizer में there should be tools available to anonymize both structured and unstructured report. तो e-object तो structured data हो गया, it's a JSON format which we have designed, but lot of unstructured data is there, like PDF is there, DICOM is there. DICOM भी structured में आता है वैसे. So we should have a way of anonymizing, encrypting, decrypting both type of data, structured as well as unstructured. And एक चीज और बोल रहे हैं इसके अंदर कि anonymizer system should allow the government or authorized agencies to access the health record of the citizens in critical cases like monitoring of notified diseases. So generally what they're saying is कि let us say government receive all the anonymized data, लेकिन वो पता लगा कि इसमें कोविड के suspected केस इतने हैं. Now they have to attend those patients. तो उनको तो पता लगाना पड़ेगा ना पेशेंट कहाँ रह रहा है. So they should have a way of kind of re-identifying those cases. And after re-identifying the case, they should be knowing कि ये patient है, ये mobile number है, ये address है, फिर उनकी वो surveillance team पहुंच जाएगी वहाँ पर उनको treatment देने के लिए. So kind of de-identification and re-identification is the right strategy, rather than permanently anonymizing the thing. Permanently anonymizing करने के लिए हमारे पास use cases हैं, pharma companies के साथ हम data share कर रहे हैं, clinical trials के लिए कर रहे हैं, वहाँ हम permanently anonymize कर सकते हैं. There should not be any way for them to recover the data. But NHA के केस में, गवर्नमेंट के केस में, we should be de-identifying that.
Sir, I have a question on this.
Yeah.
What does the Data Protection Security Act say about this particular thing? Wherein government can access basis, other, for example, for a court.
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry, थोड़ा सा miss कर दिया last.
No problem. Sorry, I was just saying that the Data Protection Bill Act will be here.
So,
what does that say on this particular point that you just made around government accessing such data for surveillance purposes?
okay, so basically, whatever I am talking here is I've taken it from the NDHP thing directly, as it is. तो ये जो मैंने अपनी स्लाइड में आपको लिखा हुआ है बोल रहा हूँ मैं, तो ये डायरेक्टली NDHP में लिखा हुआ है. Some of the things are written in the data protection bills and maybe the other data related bills also. तो वो उन्होंने कलेक्टिवली कितने लेजिस्लेशन से एक्यूमुलेट किया है वो हमें थोड़ा रिसर्च करना पड़ेगा इसके लिए. तो ये जो लिखा हुआ है इन्होंने कि क्रिटिकल केसेस में गवर्नमेंट एजेंसी नीड टू एक्सेस द डाटा, दिस लाइन आई हैव टेकन फ्रॉम द NDHP.
That I'm aware. I was just trying to understand it in light of.
So ultimately there are different legislations involved in that. Na? Data surveillance का कोई legislation या bill होगा. We need to study all these different things. Data protection bill is already pending in the parliament. Data protection bill जितना मैंने पढ़ा है, most of the time it talks about fiduciaries, their obligations, data security, privacy part. Anonymizer का ये वाला part मैंने नहीं देखा है डाटा प्रोटेक्शन बिल के अंदर कि गवर्नमेंट एजेंसी को देना है. लेकिन मॉनिटरिंग वाला जो केस है ये एनडीएचपी में क्लियरली मेंशन्ड है, बिकॉज इफ यू सी द करंट कोविड कंडीशन, तो करंट कोविड कंडीशन में इफ वी से कि ऑल द डाटा एट द एनालिटिकल लेयर विल बी de-identified, for example, so you cannot see the patient name, his mobile number or his address. Now government do the analysis and they find कि इसमें से 50 cases जो हैं वो suspected कोरोना cases हैं.
Actually, I'm aware of that. I am just trying to understand what the legal side of this is. I don't know if
yeah, so we need to do kind of collation of that. We need to go at a layer down, deep down this NDHP thing.
So let me clarify a little bit on that. Are you able to hear me?
Hanji.
Acha, okay. So currently the government has enforced the Epidemiology Act. Under the Epidemiology Act, it is an emergency where the government gets sweeping rights on a lot of things, including suspension of civil liberties. So under that, the government can take over any data to the extent of tracing, tracking, and isolation, arrest, including military intervention.
Yeah.
So NDHP only allows other acts to take over the data when those acts allow. NDHP doesn't say that allowed or not allowed. Similarly, Data Protection Act doesn't say that allowed or not allowed. It leaves it to the other acts. Like in current situation, it is the Epidemiology Act, which clearly gives sweeping rights to the government.
I think, sir, what they have not done is they have mentioned it in the NDHP report. Anonymizer system should allow the government to access, and they have taken the source from epidemiology report, but they should mention it in the NDHP also, where they have taken the reference from.
Yeah, so just taking that thought a little further, I was listening to a discussion on CNN yesterday in the US, and Dr. Fauci, he is the head of the communicable diseases in US, and he was being asked whether the civil liberties of the US citizens are being compromised in terms of tracing, tracking, privacy of their health records and things like that. So yeah, so US has also invoked emergency, and under an emergency they also get the right to do a whole lot of things. But in US, all these citizens are jumping up and down and saying, you are compromising our privacy. But then, just because of political reasons, Trump has not come down heavily on it. But in India, Indian government has come down heavily and gone to the extent of tracing, tracking, and isolating. And that's really required in an emergency situation. And US, we are seeing how the disease is sort of spreading why? And one of the reasons is, they're not being able to do it very well in terms of tracing.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you.
So content manager, most of the things. So this is another technical component they talks about, and we'll be giving a detailed design of consent manager as part of our JEF work that I'm doing. iSplit team has also done some work on consent manager thing. They call it health access fiduciary. A couple of things NHP talks about. One is it should be at the primary source of capture of data or retention of data at the facility level, and it should be explicit consent. So there are two type of consents basically. One is opt-in, what is opt-out. Opt-in is basically the implicit model, where is always you are assuming that patient has a consent. Whenever you are starting the treatment of the patient, you are assuming that patient has a default consent for allowing his records to be stored, shared, and exchanged with anyone. The other is the explicit consent. Basically, each and every record, patient should explicitly mention this record can be exchanged, this record cannot be exchanged. So explicit model is what consent manager talks about. Third thing, and I think we already discussed is right to forget. This is, what they have mentioned, that even if I've shared the record with someone, it should not be forever. So I should be able to revoke my consent, and just after revocation of the consent, my record storage or whatever privileges are given to that person for accessing my record should be removed. So that technical control should be in place. And fourth thing that talks about is, even this, we have to work on is because consent manager as a service they talk about. So all these different technical components that I'm talking about, they practically talk it as a SaaS service, software as a service. Because given the size and scale of different facilities, we cannot think like each and every HIA system will build this consent manager or anonymizer. And practically, it's not feasible also, because then everyone has to go and make changes in their systems to do that. So instead of that, we can develop these services as set of services, basically cloud services or maybe microservices, and deploy somewhere on the cloud, and whoever want to use the anonymizer service, they can use it, or consent manager as a service, they can use it. So this is the model NDHP talks about. The third and fourth layer on top of this is basically the application and the access delivery control layer. The application building block layer is they are saying that you have the data layer, then you have the technology layer. So you should publish all the application functionalities as the open APIs, and using these open APIs, anybody should be able to develop any sort of application. So practically, we are already in XSL. We have given the microservices designed to our SCA partners, and they are building different products using these application APIs. So that is the application block. Telemedicine, they are giving a priority given the low, doctor-patient ratio in the country. So this telemedicine should be a focus. Access and delivery thing, when they say is mobile first strategy, is practically like, all the applications should be accessible on mobiles. Number one, because there is a huge mobile penetration in the country. And besides mobile and web applications format, there should be other kind of applications built, like call center application should be developed, which are kind of offering the telephonic support to the health services to the patient, citizens. Then they are talking about India Health Portal, so similar to Umang Portal, which is a citizen portal kind of a thing. They are talking about the India Health Portal, which is, there should be a multilingual portal. It should be available in different languages, dialects. Kannada maybe Maharashtrian maybe. And this portal should be one single place where citizen can access all the health related services, digital services. This is another model they are talking about. So we can integrate all the services together in this portal thing. Then social media applications they talk about, where, like for example, emergency management, community-based services, different social media apps should be there. Gamification, or chat related thing, lot of blogs, web 2.0 features we can implement, audio video things, and then IVR services, which is again the voice based controls. So you have the IVR services available for your mobile agencies, like you want to avail any prepaid postpaid service, you have the IVR call based menu. Same kind of services they want to develop for the health. So these are different formats NDHP talks about in which we can deliver the applications. And one last thing they talk about is a unified health communication center. So this is exactly the need of time today. If you see the COVID condition today, practically this should have been developed earlier. So they are talking about a health communication center in place, which is kind of a response team, and it should have the access to the cases, and it should have the ability to constantly monitor the disease surveillance and outbreak response. So what NDSP talking about is there should be a mechanism like this team should have the information available from all other components, whatever we have spoken about. Then it should be able to run the analytics on those that information. Ultimately, it should be able to generate the alerts, visualizations, reports, and based on that, it should be able to take the response. So, and then it talks about deploying the artificial intelligence and the machine learning techniques in that. So this communication center, had it been there in the country, then we could have combat this COVID thing in a much better way. But right now, we all see that whatever numbers are coming, nobody has a faith on those numbers. At least I don't have a faith on those numbers where these are coming. So this communication center ultimately will be helping in kind of attending the national emergencies like all. So that's all. Any questions? Any discussion points? Please feel free to ask. Raghav or anybody?
Thank you, Krishna.
Okay, so I'm done with this session. Afternoon, I will have the HIE session.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Krishna.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Krishna.
No, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.